We didn't see any changes to the legends so far in Season 15, but that doesn't mean the meta hasn't shifted. I'm going through the best and the worst legends for this season, so let's go. Starting off in D tier, first one is Revenant. So let's just be real for a second. All things considered, Revenant has some great attributes. His passive is solid and his tactical is pretty good too. The tactical can be very disorienting for opponents, especially because it's not easy to see or hear if you get hit by it, and not to mention your abilities will be on cooldown until the silence wears off. So why am I putting him in D tier? Well, his hitbox is huge, and his ultimate is not very good. In fact, it can actually seriously backfire for him and his teammates. There were some rumblings from the devs last season that they were looking at finding ways to improve Revenant, but clearly that's been tabled for now. I do admit he seems to be a tough legend to balance because we have seen Revenant be towards the top tier in the past, but a lot of why he was so good was the frustration around dealing with his ultimate. It had very little audio or visual cues that it was going off, and it was often coupled with things like Octane's jump pad, which also had no or very little audio at the time. Since then, those things have changed, and it's left Revenant in this weird state. We'll just have to wait and see if they're actually going to buff him or if they're just talking about it. Next up in D tier is Mirage. Now I know there's a lot of loyal Mirage mains out there who enjoy playing him and totally understand his utility. So listen, at times in 1v1s, Mirage can be a beast, but in the majority of situations, people will be able to read what's going on. I do play Mirage a good bit in pubs, and yeah, of course, some players still fall for the decoys, but I gotta say that rarely happens against higher level players. And since skill-based matchmaking is cranked to the max, well, yeah, the people I'm fighting know who the real Mirage is and who is the decoy. Keep in mind, it's really not that difficult for experienced players to figure this out, especially if they witness the Mirage actively send out a decoy or decloak. Mirage hasn't been changed since Season 5. A lot of high-level players have been playing since then, or even before then, and that's 10 seasons of mastering how to deal with Mirage and his abilities. I do wish they would tweak Mirage in the upcoming patch to make him feel fresh again, but I'm just not going to hold my breath. Moving on to C tier. First up is Lifeline. I used to enjoy playing Lifeline a lot, and she can certainly have her moments where she's more valuable than a C tier legend. But ultimately, she's not as good as she once was. Her ultimate and tactical are definitely a bit better, but the power Lifeline truly had was in her revive passive. And I know last season she saw a brief rise in her pick rate because Seer's tactical can't cancel a Lifeline's revive, but I don't think that makes her good enough overall. Plus, she was basically only being played for that one reason, and that was because Seer is such a high-picked legend, particularly in the higher elos. Now, I could see making the argument to place her in B tier, but most of the time, her revive passive only works if the fight has already ended or you're somehow completely safe from any angles by being indoors or surrounded by cover. Whereas in the past, you were able to get a revive off in a dicey situation, and yeah, your teammate might get re-knocked pretty quickly, but at least you would get them up and it was kind of anyone's game. Second in C tier is the new legend Catalyst. I think a lot of players thought she was going to be better than what she currently is, and if I'm being honest, that's usually how it goes when a legend comes out and underperforms. The trailers that Apex make aren't going to make a legend look terrible, but the truth about the legend actually comes out when they are integrated into the live game amongst all of the other legends. Her passive is probably the best part about her because blocking doors or creating new doors is certainly a strong ability, but it's still pretty niche. You need a door for that to be handy, otherwise it's completely useless. Her tactical and ultimate are both pretty underwhelming at the moment, but with a few tweaks from the balancing devs, I think they could seriously improve her kit. The biggest disappointment, I think, has to be that Seer is actually a complete counter to her and her wall, which has come to a surprise to many as she was basically advertised as the counter to him and other wallhack legends. At this time, it's unclear if this is a bug or if this is how they intended it to be. Next up in C tier, and some of you are not going to be happy about this placement, but yeah, it's Octane. I struggle to see Octane's value, particularly on this map and sort of in general. I do think he's probably a bit better on maps like Olympus or World's Edge, but Broken Moon is bigger and it's a bit more wide open. So if you're going to use Mobility Legend, there's definitely better options out there. His jump pad, which is his ultimate, is pretty underwhelming on this map. You can find much better utility in some of the other legends I'll get into later in this video. Next in C tier is probably the most nuanced legend in the game, Crypto. He's great for taking selective fights with a coordinated team, but he's not great for solo queuing. It's sort of hard to justify running Crypto over some of the other recon legends who are able to provide info in a faster and more effective way. I still like Crypto, and I understand he's not for everyone, but if they are going to make him somewhat of a top tier legend, they really are going to have to mess with how the drone works. It's a very awkward ability in Apex because you take yourself out of first person and go into third person, and that's just not something that fits well in Apex. And I understand he's powerful in these very, very niche moments, but overall, running Crypto over the other recon legends is usually not a great idea. The last legend I have in C tier is going to be Vantage. Now, the Season 14 legend was sort of a disappointment. Vantage's kit isn't that bad overall, but she's just sort of out of place at the moment. Could she be up in B tier? I guess. But she's definitely lacking, and part of why I'm putting her this low is because of her tactical. It's just not as good as it could be. There's times where using her tactical is extremely awkward. Having to maintain line of sight on Echo at times can be extremely inconvenient and just straight up wonky. And then there's other times where you're flying through the air and you'd like to control your momentum a little bit better and you're just unable to. I also think the activation for when you can use the double jump should be extended a little bit longer. There's no doubt though that her sniper is extremely strong. And if you don't know, the size of the sniper bullet is much larger than any other bullet in the game. So you couple that with how fast that bullet travels, well, it makes hitting enemies pretty dang easy. I don't think they need to buff her sniper in any meaningful way. I just think that if they tweak her tactical a little bit, she'd be much higher on a tier list. Okay, moving on to the legends who are just mid, B tier. First up is Ashe. Now, Ashe has been out for a little over a year now, and she's had a brief glimpse of being in the meta, but nothing has ever lasted. I'm not sure if there's a world in which Ashe ever becomes truly S tier, because I think she could use a small buff or two, but I don't know what ability exactly could be buffed. I think it would have to be around her portal, but I understand they can't buff it so much that it makes Wraith's portal obsolete. Unfortunately, for a game like Apex, when they make a legend that has a very similar ability to another legend, they're kind of confined to how good that ability can get. Her tactical is still pretty strong, dealing 20 damage and tethering enemies' movement, but it does move very slow and can be avoided pretty easily. Second in B tier is Mad Maggie. Well, why isn't she in A tier? Well, her ball is still super inconsistent. So first off, with an underwhelming ability like this Wrecking Ball, it should not be able to deal damage and slow Maggie herself. It makes no sense, and honestly, you can throw the ball in a way where it shouldn't come back and hit you, and yet it does, and it can easily cost you the fight if it winds up slowing and stunning you during that engagement. My favorite part about Maggie is her passive and her Riot Drill tactical, but I do wish they would put a little bit more time into fixing her Wrecking Ball because I think she could have some serious potential to be a top tier legend. I'm still going to play her a ton this season, but I do understand her Wrecking Ball is always going to hold her back. Third in B tier is Bangalore. Now, Bangalore hasn't been changed in I think about 2 years. So she's sort of the epitome of a balanced legend. I do have to say that some players are obviously going to use Bangalore better than B tier, but a lot of players use her below B tier. And that usually is because they don't understand how to use her ultimate correctly, and they don't understand when or where to be using her smoke grenades. One aspect to Bangalore that is severely underrated is her passive, as it will give you this double time speed boost, particularly in these close-up 1v1s against enemies, and that can make dodging bullets actually possible at times. I don't necessarily think Bangalore needs a huge buff or anything, but I just think it's how her abilities work, and they're sort of just middle of the road. She's definitely a pretty good legend to be solo queuing in pubs with. Fourth in B tier is Watson. Now, I think this map is pretty decent for a Watson's playstyle. There are tons of good buildings to use her fences and her ultimate in, and even holding some of those 3-story houses where the zip rails connect are a great place to be as a Watson. I think she's definitely in a much better place ever since last season when they tweaked her fences. They're now much easier to place and to connect, and I think if you're trying to grind rank this split, Watson could be a very solid pick for your squad. Fifth in B tier is Loba. Now, similar to Watson, Loba provides some decent value to her team. Obviously, with her placement in B tier, it's clear I don't think of Loba as being OP, but she's definitely not useless. So with that said, there's certainly some room to improve this legend without making her extremely unbalanced. The first thing they could do is alter her cooldown on her tactical, and the second thing they could potentially do is allow for 3 items to be taken from the black market. Now, this could be too OP, but I think there's a way to make it so that if you just respawn a teammate and they currently have no loot or very little loot, allowing a teammate like that to take 3 items doesn't seem to be too unfair, and it would severely increase Loba's value proposition. Now, last in B tier is Fuse. Now, this is another solid middle of the road pick. His damage dealing capabilities are some of the highest out of all of the legends. Between his passive, being able to stack multiple nades, his knuckle cluster, and his ring of fire, well, they all serve a purpose in many different kinds of fights. I truly think Fuse would be higher on this list if they finally tweaked his ultimate. At times, it just feels like a ripoff. I swear I'll perfectly place it around an opponent or two, and they run through it unscathed. And that's because if you move out of the ring of fire quick enough, you only take 5 damage. And this feels a bit cheap. I think if they made his ult be on a longer cooldown, but made it so that enemies would be forced to either stay in the circle or risk taking significant amount of damage from running through the fire, then Fuse would be closer to A or S tier. Without a doubt though, this legend can cause a ton of chaos. So if you're looking for that this season, then Fuse is your pick. If you guys are enjoying this video, all I ask in return is for you to hit that subscribe button. I'm getting super close to 100,000 subscribers, and I'm working on a ton of great Apex content for season 15. So thank you for doing that. All right, let's move on to the second best legends, A tier. First up is Pathfinder. Now, I've come to accept that Pathfinder will never be changed. We've all been asking for a new passive or for his hitbox to be reduced, but they seem dead set on just keeping him how he is. For that reason, he's more likely to be a B tier legend overall, but he can be A or maybe even S tier in the right hands. I'm putting him in A tier specifically because of this map. There's a ton of verticality with buildings, and he's able to use his grapple to reach them or even reach the zip rails. This will be extremely handy at times. Pathfinder is one of the legends that has a huge skill gap because of his grapple. But overall, it's just too easy to connect and deal massive damage to him when he isn't flying through the air. Frankly, he can also be a huge liability on teams because of how quick he can get taken out. With all of that said though, his tactical is still the most fun ability to use in the entire game once you master it. Second in A tier is Wraith. A legend which used to be played by all has now been replaced by other mobility legends. Wraith is still a solid pick in season 15. Her portal and her phase are both great assets to her and her teammates. Her passive is a joke. It doesn't work 75% of the time and it's extremely outdated. I think they could buff her a tiny bit to make her more useful and to shake up the meta a bit, but that probably won't happen because typically they go off of legend pick rates and hers is still pretty high. If you're looking to master a new legend in season 15, well, Wraith does have a huge skill gap, and that's why you see a lot of higher level players playing her. Third in A tier is Gibby. Now, Gibby's still played a ton in the higher elo. I think he's been taken down a notch from previous seasons though. This isn't because they've changed anything with Gibby's kit, it's just that other legends have somewhat absorbed his place. On the new map, I think Gibby is still a really strong legend. There's a ton of open space where his bubble and his airstrike will come in handy. But Gibby definitely requires a team. He's not the best legend to solo queue with if your teammates run off, do their own thing, and then die shortly after. So keep that in mind if you're thinking about playing Gibby this season. Alright, fourth in A tier is Caustic. Caustic is the ultimate offensive and defensive legend. He's always been one of my favorite legends, and although he may not be as good as he once was, he still can provide an immense amount of value to him and his team in season 15. So far, my experience on Broken Moon with Caustic is pretty similar to other maps. If I stay close to cover and indoor areas, I have a ton of assets at my hand. But if I'm caught out transitioning from one POI to another, I'm extremely vulnerable while playing as Caustic. So for those reasons, he remains an A tier pick. I think you'll see him in some high level ranked, and I think you'll see a few of them in your public matches. I don't think Broken Moon is the best map for Caustic, but it's still early on and a lot could change. So let's see how it plays out. Second to last in A tier is Bloodhound. This recon legend is still extremely powerful in all levels of play and just adds a ton of value to not only themselves but their teammates as well. A simple scan reveals so much about your nearby surroundings. It's so helpful to know how many people you're going up against, how many teams are within the area, and if an area is completely safe. Sometimes just revealing no one is telling in itself. Bloodhound is a very strong legend to solo queue with, particularly in ranked because it requires minimal voice communication with your teammates about where enemies are or are not. I do wish wallhack legends as a whole were not as important as they are in Apex Legends currently, but that doesn't seem like that will ever change. So for that reason, I still think it's important to have a recon legend on your team. If you remember what Bloodhound was like before they got buffed, all the way back in season 6, then go ahead and smash the like button. I'll give you a little hint. They were not good at all. All right, last up in A tier, and some of you are gonna think I'm crazy for putting this legend up so high, but yeah, Rampart. I don't think she fits in B tier or S tier, but A tier is definitely where she belongs, especially in the right player's hands. Rampart isn't played a ton, and although her playstyle and abilities are very unique to the game as a whole, they have done a pretty good job of buffing her since she came out all the way back in Season 6. I like to think of her as the honey badger of Apex Legends. Her amped walls and turret are just extremely powerful, and it does take a bit of baiting to get your enemies where you want them to be, but that doesn't mean you need to camp. With this legend, just be patient at times and make some of the enemies come to you. You'll be surprised to see how much damage you can output when you're behind her walls or you pull out Sheila. Don't sleep on Rampart in Season 15. Now on to the best legends in the game, S tier. If you know anything about Apex, then some of these won't shock you, but first up is Horizon. This map is perfect for Horizon, and it seems like every enemy team that I've come across has a Horizon on their team. If you're wondering why she's so good, well, it's all of her abilities, but primarily her passive and tactical. The tactical is becoming a bit ridiculous these days because although it's been nerfed, it's still so unique in terms of how the mobility works. Flying up in the air while allowing for you or your whole team to take it and still being able to fire your gun is a bit overpowered. Another thing that most players don't know is unlike zip lines or jump pads, your accuracy while in the gravity lift isn't affected. This is the cherry on top that makes fighting a Horizon so annoyingly difficult, and I don't know exactly how she needs to be toned down, but taking away the complete accuracy while in the lift could be a great place to start. Second in S tier is Seer. Now surprisingly, Seer remained untouched going into Season 15. This means he's incredibly strong and will continue to be highly utilized in pro play, every elo of ranked, and basically any other lobby in the game. Wall hack abilities will always be strong and useful in first-person shooter games, and to put it plainly, the amount of info that Seer can provide is just unmatched. Being able to know where your enemies are will give you a constant advantage, but for him it doesn't end there. You're able to cancel heals, abilities, revives. I mean, so much is attached to Seer's kit that frankly is just bad for the game. You can argue with me in the comments, but I know I'm not alone in saying that Seer is not good for the game of Apex. For the people who are fans of him, it doesn't appear that we'll see a Seer nerf until maybe Season 16, as his heirloom is due to drop halfway through this season, and we all know what that means. Third in S tier is Newcastle. Despite Newcastle not having a super high pick rate and most players not thinking he is S tier, I'm here to tell you he is, especially in high level play. He has the best revive animation out of all of the legends, and the cover he can create is not only rapid, but vast. Not to mention, he's also fortified, which means he takes less damage in exchange for having that bigger hitbox. Newcastle is probably the best defensive support legend in the game right now, and he hasn't completely taken over the meta like I thought he might. Obviously, he's at his peak with a full coordinated team and might not be as good while solo queuing, but if you're looking for a sleeper pick in Season 15, then I have to go with Newcastle. Last in S tier is Valkyrie. Although she might not be as popular as Horizon this season, she will still be utilized a ton. Broken Moon only has one jump tower on the entire map, and there are a ton of tricky choke points with high mountains, and that's where Valk's ult will come in handy for you and your squad. Her jetpack passive is also very strong on this map because of all the different verticality, and if you're near any zip rails, you should always be able to connect to them while playing as Valk. If you're trying to rank up in Season 15 and you want to play a mobility legend, I strongly recommend Valk for Broken Moon. Alright, so now you know who the best legends are. Well, great, but it's not going to do you any good if you can't aim. I covered everything you need to know to master your aim in this video right here. Check it out next. Thanks for watching. Peace.